Alright, another day, another learning video. Let's pick up where we're going. I can't even remember how to get the rest of this to show up again. It's all hidden. I'm sure we'll figure it out in the video though.
Out the handle of our sword. First, we'll need to get out of local mode so that we can see all of our objects again. I'll go up to the view menu and then about halfway down, go to the local view submenu and then choose toggle local view, the top option. Then after you click that, you should see all of your meshes are back and we are ready to work. We're going to be in object mode now. So object mode, I'll select the handle, then we'll go up to the view menu and then go down to frame selected. This is where we're going to be working for the next few chapters. And then for step number 1, we need to make our oval shape on the handle. So while my handle is selected, I'll hit S on my keyboard and then I'm going to scale down on my blue axis. Now, an oval shape is fine here. You don't have to have my exact values, but to give you my exact values, I'll go into my object properties, then under the scale, we're going to have 0.14, 0.07. Again, it doesn't have to be exact, but if you want to get the exact same result I have.
Oh, so he's actually slipping into it a wee bit. Okay. This is the part where a lot of videos that I've did before, they I feel like they screw up here because you're trying to follow the video to be exact, but they never give you the exact, the scale, the rotation, the location. So it always ends up different. And then they try to do something, and then yours is different from theirs, and you don't know where you went wrong because it's not exactly the same.
Go ahead and set those values. Then for step number 2, we need to taper back on the handle. So the top edge is going to be wide and then it's going to taper down and get smaller towards the pommel. I'll hit tab to go into edit mode. Then I'll hit 2 to enter edge mode. Then I'm going to select one of those back edges and then I'm going to go up to my select menu, then go down to select loops and then select the top option, select edge loops. And that'll just guarantee and make sure that we have the entire back loop selected. And then once we have that selected, I'll go ahead and hit S to jump into my.
Yeah, that's the hold alt click, does the same thing. That's something I actually still remember.
Scale tool again. Then I'm going to scale it in on the red axis to match the width of the pommel. And then after we have that scaled in, we should start to now see that we have a taper effect happening. Larger on the guard, smaller towards the pommel. Then for step number 3, we need to add in our loop cuts.
Taper effect? What in there? One second. Get this scale. Do it right, I think. You got to go in a wee bit, never mind. In there, darn a wee bit. I'll go inside because I'm weird. Come on, grab it. That's about right. Anyway.
And then scale them in to block in the shape of the handle. So while I'm still in edit mode, I'm going to hit Control R to enter loop cut mode. I'm going to hover my mouse over the center of the handle until I can find my preview edge. Then click to enter the loop cut mode, then hit escape to drop it on it. And that's going to perfectly drop it into the center of the handle. And now we're going to repeat this, but then this time in between the center loop cut and the guard. I'm going to hit Control R to enter loop cut mode, hover my mouse over to find the edge center, click on the edge to enter loop cut mode, hit escape to drop it. And then there we go. And then immediately we want to hit S on the keyboard to scale this in. This time we're going to use the white handle, our uniform scale. I'll scale that inwards to create that shape for the first grip. We're creating a two-handed grip here. To loop cut mode, hit escape to drop it. And then there we go. And then immediately we want to hit S on the keyboard to scale this in. This time we're going to use the white handle, our uniform scale. I'll scale that inwards to create that shape for the first grip. We're creating a two-handed grip here for this giant greatsword. Then we repeat that again, this time in between the center and the pommel. I hit Control R to enter loop cut mode.
Okay, using the middle mouse button, so if you do control the middle mouse button, adds more loops. Probably would have been easier if they did that before. But keep it nice and easy.
Mode, hover my mouse over the edge, find the preview edge, click to enter loop cut mode, hit escape to drop it in the center. Hit S to jump into my scale, then scale it down with the white uniform scale. And then that will be the second handle. And there we go. There we have our basic block in for our handle. We'll continue with this in the next chapter. To finish off our handle, we need to add in our edge crease and our subdivision surface to smoothen it out. And while I'm still in edit mode, for step number 1, we'll make our selection, which is the center edge. I'm going to hit 2 on my keyboard to jump into edge selection mode. I'm going to select one of the edges in the very center of the blade. Then I'll go up to my select menu, select loops, and then select edge loops. That'll just make sure we have everything selected on that loop. Then after that, we should see that we have the edge going all the way around selected. Then step number 2, we need to add in our edge crease, the same way we did it for the guard. So go
while we're here, just do here, hold control, I think it is. And then, yeah. So if you click one and you hold control, then you click another one on the same loop, it'll select everything from your first selection to the last selection. So it says I click 4 here. So I'll click this one and I go around to the bottom here, hold control, it'll give me around the bottom. Alright, then if I want to come around here, hold control again, gives me up there. And that way when you use the selected one, that's another way to select the edges. But back to the
up to my edge menu, then I'll go about halfway down and then select edge crease. And then again, immediately after, don't click anything. We need to move our mouse upwards to increase the strength of the edge crease. And you'll see that in the top left of your viewport. Move your mouse until you see the top left value reach a value of 1, or your edges have turned completely purple. Then after that, we should then just click on our mouse to drop that in. Now we should see that our edges are now purple in the center. Then for step number 3, we need to add in our subdivision surface modifier. Go to the wrench icon, go to the modifiers panel. We'll select add modifiers, then second column, 5th one from the bottom, select subdivision surface, same workflow that we've been doing. And then I'll disable in edit mode, and then I'm going to set both my viewport levels.
Okay, there is a way to do that with a hotkey, but I can't remember.
And my render levels to a value of 2. And that's that. And then I'll just jump, make sure I'm back in object mode to be able to see this. And we can see, of course, the surface still looks bumpy, so we need to shade smooth. So I'll right click, shade smooth all the way to the top. And again, to be able to shade smooth, we need to do this in object mode, not edit mode. Great. And that's a wrap for the block end of the handle, and we'll continue in the next chapter.
Say it's one of the best tutorials.
The goal for this chapter is to add a torus shapes that will add the final details for our handle. And so step number 1, we'll add our torus primitive shapes. And whenever creating new objects, generally speaking, we want to start back in object mode. And then we'll go to our add menu, we'll go to the mesh submenu, and then we'll choose our torus shape. And there we go. At the center of the world will be our now giant torus. So before clicking anywhere, we now want to jump into our last action operator panel. And friendly reminder, if you don't see this, you might have clicked off it already if you might have performed another last action. So to get it back, just select your torus and then hit F9. Now I'm going to set my major segments to 20, minor segments to 10, minor radius to 0.15, and then I'm going to set my rotation value of X into 90 degrees. So what is all this stuff? Where did I get all those values from? The major segments are just a fancy word for how many polygons going around the torus. The minor segments are how many polygons going around the other way, the thickness of the torus. The minor radius is how round the torus is going to be, not how big it is, but how thick the overall shape is going to be. And again, the major segments and the minor segments, these are more just to start a bit more low polygon, and then we can always add more polygons in as we go. And then the rotation, of course, just to get it the initial direction that we want to go. And then our final step with this will just be our shade smooth. So I'll right click and then we'll go to our shade smooth at the top of the right click menu. And then that, of course, will again make it help it feel less polygonal and more smooth. All right. And then step number 2 is to set our location and scale settings. I'll hit G and then use my move and grab tool to move it down in a rough approximated area. Then I'm going to scale it down using S. I'm going to start with the uniform scale and just get the width looking good. And friendly reminder, this is a good time for us to do our frame selected so that we can work a bit easier. And then after I have my width set, I'm going to go ahead and then grab the blue Z axis and then to our shade smooth at the top of the right click menu. And then that, of course, will again make it help it feel less polygonal and more smooth. All right. And then step number 2 is to set our location and scale settings. I'll hit G and then use my move and grab tool to move it down in a rough approximated area. Then I'm going to scale it down using S. I'm going to start with the uniform scale and just get the width looking good. And friendly reminder, this is a good time for us to do our frame selected so that we can work a bit easier. And then after I have my width set, I'm going to go ahead and then grab the blue Z.
Oh, wait, hold on. I missed that. Oh, no.
Grab tool to move it down in a rough approximated area. Then I'm going to scale it down using S. I'm going to start with the uniform scale and just get the width looking good. And friendly reminder, this is a good time for us to do our frame selected so that we can work a bit easier. And then after I have my width set, I'm going to go ahead and then grab the blue Z axis, and then I'll start making the overall oval shape so it starts to wrap around the handle a bit tighter.
Okay. I think that's right. Looks weird.
And super special note here, we want the torus embedded into the handle, not on top of the handle. So half of the inner part of the torus is
Okay, sounds about right. Or I don't know. Why is that? I'm not doing the frickin' red one. We're doing the blue one. Why is it doing the red one? I don't know. Scale. There we go. Finally got it. Halfway in.
is not going to be visible at all. It's going to be inside the handle. All right, and then step number 3 is just to duplicate these and make out the other 2 torus shapes. So I'll right click, go to duplicate objects, I'll hit escape to drop it in place. And then again, I'll move it down in a rough approximated area where that thickness of the handle is most thick. I'll scale it in a little bit as needed, and then we'll duplicate one more time. So right click, duplicate objects, escape to drop it, and then I'll move it down to the base of the handle. Now for the final step, we have a minor shape to adjust at the bottom of our handle. You'll notice where the handle meets the pommel, move it down to the base of
Right, so stop it here. Do the scale on the side now. Do the scale, do the off the side. I actually like being inside here so we can see what I'm doing. So turn here. We wanted to work halfway, didn't I? So we're right. Okay, that one's kind of I'm probably doing too much attention to detail here, but why don't I get so I'm happy with
the handle. Now for the final step, we have a minor shape to adjust at the bottom of our handle. You'll notice where the handle meets the pommel, there's a gap, and we want to scale up the handle so that it morphs from an oval shape into a circular shape. So I'll select my torus and then I'll scale it up with the blue axis until I reach that circular shape that we're looking for. Next, we'll need to scale up the handle, so
that's why you shouldn't do it yourself. You should wait to finish frickin' the video. So torch shape, let's work right. Let's work right. Bigger. Grab the scale. Kind of, yeah, okay, that's fitting on there. I think that's okay. Why am I turning?
select the handle, jump back into edit mode. Now I'll need to select all the verts at the very base, so I'll go ahead and jump back into wireframe mode so that I can do this selection a little bit easier. Again, wireframe.
Again, hold Alt, you can do it there. So you go wireframe, double check. I totally forgot to double check wireframe. There you go, hold Alt, click it to stage.
Allows us to select through an object so we make sure we get everything. Then after I have my selection, I'll jump back into solid mode. I'll then scale it up with the blue Z axis until I meet that torus circular shape that we wanted. Great, and then that's going to end up being a wrap for the
Sure, no gaps. No gaps are tall. Object mode again. Yeah, this looks really good for so far.
handle, so we'll go ahead and start working on the pommel in the next chapter. Our goal now is to model out the base of the pommel. I'll start back in object mode. I'll select my pommel base, and then we'll go up to the view menu. Select frame selected to be able to get into position and work a little bit easier. Then for step number 1, we're going to add the subdivision modifier to smoothen it out. I'll add the modifier, then I'll go all the way down to subdivision modifier. And then we'll use the same default values that we've been working with. We'll turn display and edit mode off, and then we'll set the levels within the viewport to a value of 2. And then we'll right click, shade smooth on the object. And again, that is all the same values that we've been working up into this point. And then for step number 2, we're going to insert a loop cut directly in the middle of the cylinder and adjust it. I'll jump back into edit mode. I'm going to hit Control R to enter loop cut mode, hover my mouse over to find the edge center, click on the edge to enter loop cut mode, hit escape to drop it, and then there we go. And then immediately we want to hit S on the keyboard to scale this in, and then I'll scale inwards using the white handle or uniform scale. And what we're after here is we're trying to get a little U shape going, adding a bit of a curve. Now for step number 3, we're going to add a star-shaped tip to this object. To do so, I'm going to jump in vert selection mode by hitting 1 on the keyboard, and then I'm going to shift select every other vertice on the very end of the cylinder. So I'll shift select, then I'll go around skipping every other vert, and then after I've completed the selection, I'll orbit around and confirm that I have all the right points selected. And then
is this the part where we're supposed to use... Let me see if I can get it here. Frame selected? No, it was none. How did we get that to show just the little thing before, just by itself? It'd be a whole lot easier if all that wasn't there. Nah, I'll just do it here anyway, and then try and find out a hotkey before I think I've got every other selected. Yep.
Then I'll scale inward with S using the white handle again, our uniform scale. Now a quick bonus tip, it's a bit hard to see at this point what we're doing. We can't really see the star-shaped ending. And we could go into wireframe mode, but even then sometimes wireframe mode can be difficult to see as well. To the left of wireframe, we have our X-ray view. We can toggle this on and off. I'm going to leave it on for now. And now if I orbit around in my perspective view, we can now see through objects and be able to make decisions a little bit easier. And there we go. Now I can clearly say this is a good star-shaped tip, and I'll just go back and turn off my X-ray view. And I'll check everything out, see how everything's going. Everything's looking good. I'll make my final tweaks from here. And then for step number 4, we'll duplicate the torus and then move it into place. Back into object mode, I'll select the torus shape. I'm going to right click, duplicate object, hit escape to drop it, and then immediately I'll hit my G, 10. And now if I orbit around in my perspective view, we can now see through objects and be able to make decisions a little bit easier. And there we go. Now I can clearly say this is a good star-shaped tip, and I'll just go back and turn off my X-ray view. And I'll check everything out, see how everything's going. Everything's looking good. I'll make my final tweaks from here. And then for step number 4, we'll duplicate the torus and then move it into place. Back into object mode, I'll select the torus shape. I'm going to right click, duplicate object, hit escape to drop it, and then immediately I'll hit my G to enter my move tool and then move it into place. Then after I have that in a rough position, I'll go ahead and start scaling in with the S. And I'm going to want this to be scaled down so it's covering the entire star-shaped tip. And then once we have that, that'll be a wrap for this chapter, and we'll continue with the pommel in the next chapter.
Oh wait, tip.
Our goal now is to model at the very tip of the pommel, and we're going to start with blocking in the circular shape in the middle. And friendly reminder to frame selected one last time during this modeling section if you haven't done so already. We're going to need to have those precision controls here for the final steps. For step number 1, we need to scale the cylinder to match the very end of the base that we just modeled out. We want it to match the torus. So we're going to start in object mode. So I'll jump into my scale tool, I'll grab the blue Z axis, and then I'll scale inwards to match that height. Maybe leaving it just a little tiny bit bigger. And then for step number 2, we need to add in some loop cut. Then I'm going to jump back to edit mode. I'm going to hit Control R to enter loop cut mode. Then I'm going to insert one loop cut directly in the middle. So hover my mouse over to find the edge center. Click on the edge to enter loop cut mode, hit escape to drop it right there in the middle. And then we're going to add another one in between this new loop cut and the top. So I'll select right, a little tiny bit bigger. And then for step number 2, we need to add in some loop cut. Then I'm going to jump back to edit mode. I'm going to hit Control R to enter loop cut mode. Then I'm going to insert one loop cut directly in the middle. So hover my mouse over to find the edge center. Click on the edge to enter loop cut mode. Hit escape to drop it right there in the middle. And then we're going to add another one in between this new loop cut and the top. So I'll select right there to add my second loop cut. And then we do not want to do the bottom because we're going to delete those faces later to do the mirror modifier. And then for step number 3, we need to add in a mesh fill to fill in the top of the cylinder so that we can then start modeling it out. I'm going to hit W, and then I'm going to click and drag on the top edge of the cylinder, grabbing that top edge there. Now we need to actually insert the mesh fill, and we can do so by going up to the Vert menu, and then near the top, we're going to go to New Edge from Faces and Vertices.
Add mesh edge face shape. Where's that? Okay. Where's... There's that. Alright. I'm blind as a bat.
Or you can just use the hotkey F to fill that in. Great, and now we should see that we now have that new face directly in the middle of our cylinder. And once we have that, for step number 4, we need to actually shape this out using an inset and extrusions. First, I'm going to just hit S for scale, and then I'm going to scale inwards just a little bit. Not too much, but just a little bit. Then from here, I'm going to grab my inset tool. I'm going to create one inset on the top. So I'll click and drag on the handle to create that. And now you can see that we now have an edge loop going around the center there. Now we're going to extrude downward. So I'll grab my extrude tool, and immediately after selecting the extrusion tool, we want to change our handle from the yellow handle, which is our normal extrusion tool, to the XYZ handle, which will give us 3 different axes to work with that we'll be using.
Where? Drag. Normal. Where the hell is normal? Am I going blind again? I might be on a different version of Blender. I know Blender 4.0 is coming out. It's in beta right now. But no, I don't even know what I'm on.
In the coming chapters, I'll click and drag on the blue axis. Access to create that base shape. And there we go. Now we have the shape blocked in, but we need to add in a little bit more to finish this off. So we're going to go back to our inset tool. I'm going to click on drag on that to create the interior. So now we have another loop going around the center there. And I'm going to do that the second time. So now we're going to have 2 insets on this bottom interior. And then while my second edge to create that base shape.
Yeah, you can just push like the CX. Why you don't lock yourself into it as well. So that might have removed that because of that, but I don't know.
And there we go. Now we have the shape blocked in, but we need to add in a little bit more to finish this off. So we're going to go back to our inset tool. I'm going to click on drag on that to create the interior. So now we have another loop going around the center there. And I'm going to do that the second time. So now we're going to have 2 insets on this bottom interior. And then while my second inset is still active, I want to merge those together. So we'll select the M hotkey to jump into our merge menu. And then I'm going to select merge at center. And there we go. Now what that's going to do is it's going to create us a triangle fan, which is just the terminology we use to describe that, where a circular shape is connected by all triangles. All right, and now the bulk of the work is done, and we're going to continue shaping this out in the next chapter. Our goal now is to delete the bottom half. We're going to scale it into an oval shape, and then we're going to extrude out the very tip of the pommel. For step number 1, we're going to delete the bottom half. So I'm going to jump into face selection mode by hitting 3, and then I'll rotate under the cylinder to get into view, and then I'm going to box drag select the bottom half.
control, clicked around there, around there. I mean, you can just do what he did. I'm gonna do it my way.
Half of the polygons. And then once I got my selection confirmed, I'm going to jump into X for delete and then select delete faces. And then again, we're going to mirror that over in the next chapter. Great, now we're ready for step number 2, which is...
Wait, my X isn't working. Is it because I did that? Can't be, can it? Yes, no.
Just to shape out the tip into an oval shape. Now I want to jump back into object mode so I can scale the entire object together. So I'm going to hit tab to jump into object mode. I'm going to grab my scale tool by hitting S, and then I'm going to scale up using the Y green axis. And then I'm going to scale it up just to get a rough estimate of the oval shape matching the reference. And for step number 3, we're going to extrude out the tip. So I'm going to go back into edit mode. I'll make sure I have my face selection on by hitting 3 on the keyboard. And then I'm going to select the top 2 polygon faces. I'll grab my extrude
to the edit mode.
Tool. I'll use the green axis to extrude upwards. Then I'll jump into my scale tool by hitting S, and then I'm going to scale inwards with the red X axis. And then our final step for this chapter, step number 4, we're going to taper down the extrusion. I'm going to hit 2 on my keyboard to jump into edge selection mode.
No. Scale. Stop it. Stop it.
Jump into my scale tool by hitting S, and then I'm going to scale inwards with the red X axis. And then our final step for this chapter, step number 4, we're going to taper down the extrusion. I'm going to hit 2 on my keyboard to jump into edge selection mode. And then I'm going to shift select the 2 edges at the top of the extrusion. Hit G for our move tool, and then I'll go ahead and move the 2 edges down to create that taper effect. Great, and there we go.
Okay, so just turn it down and turn it down. Not scale.
Go. And then before we wrap this up, we'll just orbit around, make sure everything is looking good, and then we're going to finish off the pommel on the next chapter. The goal now is to mirror the bottom half and then going to apply our subdivision and our holding edges to finish off the pommel. For step number 1, I'm going to add the mirror modifier. I'll select add modifier, and then in the second column towards the middle, we're going to select the mirror modifier. Now we can see that the default values this time are not exactly correct. We don't actually see the mirror happening. By default, the mirror axis is set to X, which is not what we want. So we're going to change this from a value of X. We're going to turn it off, and then we're going to turn on the Z axis. And there we go. Now we should see the bottom half of the pommel showing up. And then for step number 2, we're going to add in our subdivision modifier. I'll do add modifier, select subdivision surface all the way at the bottom, and then we're going to go ahead and set our default values here, disable display in edit mode, and then we're going to set the levels of viewport to 2. And then the last step here, we're going to just select the object, right click, and then shade smooth to smoothen out the normals. And don't forget, we need to be in object mode to be able to shade smooth. Now, if we take a look around, we're going to notice that we start to actually have a problem. The tip of the pommel is now having this very weird black edge to it. What is happening here? And so step number 3, we're going to fix this, and we're going to talk about a few troubleshooting techniques. And these things come up with your modeling, and oftentimes they are not so obvious. So a few tips to help troubleshoot these issues is that we want to try to remove all the variables as possible and reverse engineer what is happening. So I'm going to do this by toggling off visibility of our modifiers, because we weren't actually seeing this before we actually added the mirror in the subdivision. The monitor icon in the modifier display can help us do that. This is our viewport display. We have edit mode, which is what we've been using, and then the monitor icon to the right of that is going to disable the visibility in the entire viewport, so we can't see it in edit mode or object mode. I'll try toggling the monitor icon for visibility in the viewport on the subdivision surface first, and you can see it's still kind of sort of there. Then I'll try toggling off the monitor icon for the mirror modifier, and then if we rotate around, there we can now start to see we still have that issue on the bottom. We have some polygons on the back side of this from where we did our extrusion before. So these kind of things come up, and that's a good way to kind of reverse engineer it and figure out what's happening there. So I'll jump into edit mode. I'll jump into face selection by hitting 3. I'll select the 2 polygons. I'll hit X for delete, and then I'll delete faces. And there we go. Now the entire bottom half is deleted. Then I'll make sure my visibility for my mirror modifier is back on. I'll make sure the mirror modifier or the subdivision modifier, the monitor icon is on as well. And there we go. We'll continue in the next chapter. The goal now is to add in edge creases to turn our pommel into a hard surface mesh. In step number 1, we'll make our selection. So I'll go into edge mode by hitting 2 on my keyboard while I'm in edit mode. Then I'll start by selecting the 6 top edges that are around the extrusion of the pommel. I'll select one and then I'll shift select around all of them on the top for a total of 6 edges. Then after that, we have 4 more edges to select, each corner edge going around. I'm going to shift select the 3 visible edges from the exterior. And then once I have those, I'll have 9 selected. And then don't forget that we have 1 in the middle or orbit around and then select that 10th edge. Now we have 10 total edges selected. Now we need to select the loops, so I'll go up to my select menu, go down to select the loops, and then select edge loops. And there we should see we now.
Oh, that's okay. That would be a nice way to do it. Select. Loops. Edge loops.
Now have all the edges going around. We're ready to do our edge crease. So step number 2, we need to do our edge crease. I'll go up to the edge menu, halfway down, and I'll choose edge creases. And then once you click that, of course, don't click anywhere. Of course, after that, move your mouse while the tool is still active all the way up until you reach a value of 1. And you can see that at the top left of your viewport again. Once you have that, click to confirm. Now we should see all of our edges have turned purple. Now we can go ahead and hit tab to jump back in object mode. And now we should see that the mesh is now looking very hard surface and everything is looking great. I'll rotate around, see how that's looking, and we'll continue in the next chapter. Our goal now is to take our model from this grayscale look and create our materials, and we're going to do so with the help of the shading tab. Now, if you have struggled in the past with the shading tab, no worries. I remember what it felt like building my first shader network, so we're going to really break things down moving forward. For step number 1, we're going to go from the layout tab, and we're going to...
Actually, I just realized there that my video here is kind of got black edges, so I'll change that. It's a display capture and the hold Alt instead of Control. You can decide to cut it to a certain size. Don't know if you want OBS stuff in here, but there we go. Put it back up there. I'm just doing it up there to cover that. See the best place. I need to get a proper layer, but whatever.
And open up the shading tab. Now for this next step, you don't have to do this, but for me, to help with the recording, I'm going to go ahead and expand the 2 sides so that we can focus on the 3D view and the shader editor. This is all we're going to be using for these next few chapters. Now this next step you will want to do, and this will help us moving forward, I'm going to frame select it on my guard. I'll make sure that I'm in object mode. I'm going to select the guard, and then I'm going to go up to my view menu and then frame selected. And then that's of course going to snap us to our guard, and now we can go ahead and orbit around. And now we're going to be able to select any of our objects very easily to be able to test things out. And now for step number 3, we're going to set up the blade material. I'm going to select the blade object in my 3D view. Now, after you select your blade object, you should see the shader network pop up. And if you do not see this, you may need to click the new button at the top of the shader editor. Click that and you should be good to go. If you already see these 2 nodes in our shader editor, you're good to go. And now for step number 4, we're going to get to know the 4 material properties that we're going to be working with primarily throughout the rest of the course. Now we know about base color from our Minecraft project, right? This is where we change the color of the material. The next one we're going to get to know is the metallic property, and we can adjust this by clicking and dragging on the parameter left and right. The higher the value is, the more metallic it's going to be, and then the lower the value that is, the less metallic it's going to be. And then I'm going to leave this to a value of 1 for my metallic properties. Now we may not see much yet, and this is because the metallic parameter works alongside the roughness parameter, which is the 3rd parameter we're going to be using. And if I click on drag on my roughness, we can now see it start to move. And you can start to see, we can think of the roughness parameter as how blurry the reflections are going to be. So as I go higher, the reflections get more blurry. Then as I go lower, the reflections are going to be a lot more clear. And then I'm going to leave this on a value of somewhere around 0.1, so very low. Again, that's 0.1. Great, and now we can orbit around and we can see that our blade is now feeling much, much more believable.
Yeah, the roughness value of 0.1 is because it's not a bloody mirror, it's like metal, so it's not 100% reflection. I did a wee bit of glass before. I was actually glass is actually one of the more interesting ones to do. I only spent maybe 2 hours, but I got smudges and everything on it. It was really good. It's probably in my videos, recommended videos before, like tutorials I did. Again, it says this is probably the Grant Abbott one, the Monster and the Man. Probably still the first one because it's even beefier than this. But this is probably my second recommended video so far for new users. But it's actually, you could just start with this tutorial. It's more interesting too.
Well, it's feeling much, much more metallic. And then the last parameter we're going to get to know is the emission. And we're going to get to know the emission a bit later when we start working on our runes. And that's the initial setup, and we're going to continue to build out.
The mission is basically like light. Like, it's like a bloom. Well, it's not bloom, but it's like, if you got a light on, how dim it is, how bright it is. Bloom is how blurry the light is, but the emission is how strong the light is. It's kind of hard to explain, but I'm sure you'll cover it.
Our network in the next chapter. So the question now becomes, how do we go from a basic metallic shader to our complex shader network with all the scratches, the glowing runes, and all the fancy stuff happening? Our shader network right now looks something like this, just 2 nodes, very simple. And by the time we're done, we're going to end up with a much larger shader network, which can be a bit intimidating at first. So what is all this stuff and how do we get there? And that brings us to our goal for this chapter, which is demystifying shader networks. This chapter will be an explanation, so sit back and relax and we'll get hands-on again in the next chapter. We can break down a shader network into 3 parts: nodes, properties, and connections. Our nodes are similar to objects when we model. They're just starting points for what we're creating. Our properties are how we modify those nodes, so instead of edit mode for our objects while we're modeling, we have parameters to adjust within our nodes. Then we have connections to be able to connect all of them together to do a lot of really creative stuff. But the question then becomes, what do we connect to what? What works with what? Generally speaking, we have 3 different categories when we're talking about different shader nodes. The first one is our output, and that's going to be our easiest one. All we need to know about the output nodes is that this is how we tell Blender what node is going to be the last node within our shader network. This is the node that connects to the actual object in our 3D view. Next, we have our shader nodes. These are the nodes that have parameters for controlling things like color, reflectivity, whether or not it looks like metal, whether or not it looks like glass. These are our shader properties. The last category, we have our shader input nodes. Now, what all can we do with our shader input nodes? The most important one is, generally speaking, is going to be the image texture node, which is an image that we bring from outside of Blender. Usually we get these from an online resource such as textures.com, 3dtextures.me, polyhaven.com. All of these are great resources to find image textures. These are the 2 textures that we're going to be working with to build this shader network. We have one for our scratches and then the other one to create the runes. Then we have our mapping nodes. Mapping nodes are how we control properties such as location and scale of that image texture that we bring in onto the object. We can think of this as very similar to our move, rotate, and scale tool that we used in our 3D view. But the mapping nodes are for image textures within our shader nodes. Then we have things like color ramps. Color ramps are really good for taking image textures and then controlling the controller whether how bright it is, how dark it is, and overall crunching the values. Then we have our mix RGB node, which is very similar to our color ramp, but this is good for combining textures and overall colorizing different textures. Then we have our texture coordinate nodes, which I'll explain more in a bit in the next chapter. All this is going to seem intimidating at first, but just like modeling, as we use these nodes over and over and over, they'll slowly start to click and they're going to make a lot more sense. And we'll start building this in the next chapter.
Probably watch it again, maybe 2-3 times.
Our goal now is to apply our scratches texture onto our blade, and we're going to do so with the help of using image projections. For step number 1, we're going to import our scratches texture. And again, downloads are below the video. We'll jump into our textures folder and then we're going to locate our scratches
Okay.
image texture. Then while my blade is still selected, I'll drag and drop the scratches.
That's see if I've downloaded something before, but can't remember if I downloaded the textures. Who knows? Oh, I did. Okay. Saves a bit of time. Scratches.
image texture into my shader editor. And once I have that into my shader editor, I'm going to bypass the principled BSDF and I'll click and drag on my color parameter and I'll drop that into my surface parameter of my material output so I can see it in my 3D viewport on top of the object. Now we'll notice that the scratches on the blade look very stretched and sort of distorted. So why is this happening and how do we fix it? By default, Blender uses UVs to apply the image texture to the object. UVs are usually done in the UV editing tab and ours is currently broken. So what are UVs? Similar to this chocolate wrapper, UVs are a flat two-dimensional version of the object that we usually create in the UV editing tab. Now UVs are usually where a lot of beginners tend to hit a wall and UV editing is a very important process to get to know, but there's another way that's a little bit easier for us to get started, and that's going to be using image projections. Image projections are a way inside of our shader editor without using the UV editing tab to be able to apply image textures to our objects using simple XYZ coordinates. They won't work for every case, but they are a good way for us to apply basic images to our 3D model, and then we'll learn more about UV editing in a later course. And for step number 2, we're going to create our nodes. Inside of our shader editor, I'm going to select the add menu, and at the very top, we're going to see our...
Oh, there's a problem down here. I've touched a wee bit UV editing. It was, as he said there, I was doing the glass, I was adding the scratches before, it made me hit a wall. But eventually, what I found was, you normally, like, you'll cut out sections of an object to make it, like, flat edges. Like, if I was doing this handle, the way I would normally do it is, I would, in UV editing, you would cut out, like, from halfway in the handle, and just get the top half, and then cut out the bottom half. And then that way, you would be putting on an image just on one half, and that way you don't have to worry about it wrapping around. It will have a wee bit of an issue around our side, because it will go round. But that's UV image texture in basically in a nutshell. Cut out as many flat parts as you can so that your texture doesn't have to wrap around it. But he'll cover that in a later video. I don't know why I'm doing this, but throwing out my personal opinion on stuff.
Search option, and we can search for all of the new nodes that we're going to create using this toolbar. I'll select search, then I'm going to type in mapping to be able to find our mapping node. Once we see mapping show up, I'll hit enter to confirm, and
I put myself off by saying that.
But there's another way that's a little bit easier for us to get started, and that's going to be using image projections. Image projections are a way inside of our shader editor without using the UV editing tab to be able to apply image textures to our objects using simple XYZ coordinates. They won't work for every case, but they are a good way for us to apply basic images to our 3D model, and then we'll learn more about UV editing in a later course. And for step number 2, we're going to create our nodes. Inside of our shader editor, I'm going to select the add menu, and at the very top, we're going to see our search option, and we can search for all of the new nodes that we're going to create using this toolbar. I'll select search, then I'm going to type in mapping to be able to find our mapping node. Once we see mapping show up, I'll hit enter to confirm, and then there we see we get the new node attached to our cursor, and then I'm going to click next to the scratches images to the left to drop it into our shader editor. Then we're going to repeat this process to create our texture coordinate node. I'll go to my add menu, I'll select search, and then I'm going to type in texture coordinate. And then once we see that show up, I'll click enter to confirm, and then I'll click just to the left of our mapping node to drop it in. Then for step number 3, we're going to make our connections. We'll start with our texture coordinate node, and we'll find our object parameter directly in the middle. We'll click and drag this object parameter into our vector input of our mapping node. Then I'm going to find my vector output of the mapping node, and then click and drag that into the vector input of our scratches image texture. And if we look back at our object, we'll notice that our stretching is now mostly gone. Great. Okay, so what is all this stuff? Our texture coordinate node is how we tell Blender what source we're going to apply the image texture to the object. If you're using UV editing, you simply use the UV output. If you're using an image projection like we are now, we're going to use the object output. The other options are a bit more complicated that I generally never use, so we'll skip over those. And then step number 4, we need to set up our mapping node. Top of our mapping node, we have our type. We want to change this to a texture, the second option to the top. This just tells Blender that all of the parameters that below that we'll be working with an image texture. Then we're going to set our scale value to a value of 3 in X, Y, and Z. Great, and there we go. Now we see that our scratches are much more visible. Now, the scratches still aren't quite right. They're still stretched a little bit. And for step number 5, we need to apply scale on our blade object. If our scale value is not uniform, our object parameter on our texture
Okay. My scale's different from his. Oh no.
Coordinate node is also not going to be uniform. It's going to be slightly stretched. This is of course from when we scaled earlier during the modeling process. So to fix this, I'll select my blade, I'll go up to the object menu, go down to apply, and then I'm going to select apply scale. And then after that, I will be working with an image texture. Then we're going to set our scale value to a value of 3 in X, Y, and Z. Great, and there we go. Now we see that our scratches are much, much more visible. Now, the scratches still aren't quite right. They're still stretched a little bit. And for step number 5, we need to apply scale on our blade object. If our scale value is not uniform, our object...
Not fixed, so mine was 18. Let's see if it still looks like I never do his one. Yeah, I had a smaller blade basically, but it doesn't look like I've broken anything, so I'm just gonna leave it like that and go with the value so it stays the same. Does it stay the same? Does it look the same? God damn it. I kind of like mine being a wee bit smaller because of the circle part there, but you know what? I'm gonna stick with mine. Be different.
Object parameter on our texture coordinate node is also not going to be uniform. It's going to be slightly stretched. This is of course from when we scaled earlier during the modeling process. So to fix this, I'll select my blade, I'll go up to the object menu, go down to apply, and then I'm going to select apply scale. And then after...
Ignore that. I keep on YouTube I hit save instead of freaking on Blender. Glad that dodgy showed up there. Object, apply, scale. Right.
After that, we'll see that the scale values are all reset. They're now going to all be a value of 1, and now we'll see our texture is perfectly square and everything is good to go.
What? No. Object. Why didn't that work? Did I click something else before? No, okay.
Okay, so all of that is going to feel like it's a bit hard to digest the first time you do that. This is a lot of new information, but generally speaking, we only need to build this once. And then for the next few chapters, we're just going to duplicate and tweak these as we go. It's the same setup for all of our shaders, and we'll continue that in the next chapter. Our goal now is to take the scratches texture inside of our roughness and create some believability within our metallic blade shader. And we're going to do this with the help of the color ramp node. And the color ramp node is going to give us a bit more control between our scratches and our roughness shader to be able to control the blurriness of the reflections. For step number 1, I'll create the color ramp node. I'll go up to the add menu, select search, and then type in color ramp. And note that this is all one word, color ramp, one word. Once I see that, I'll hit enter to confirm. And then the color ramp node is attached to my cursor. I'll hover over in between my scratches image texture and my connection of my material output, and you notice that connection then becomes highlight, and then I can just click on that to automatically insert that color ramp node. And now we should see that we have our scratches color output connected to the factor of our ramp, and then the color ramp out color is then connected to the surface parameter node in our material output. For step number 2, I'll adjust my color ramp settings. I'll click and drag on the white values, and then you'll notice that we can now start to adjust how much white values of this image that we're seeing. This is sort of like a levels tool if you're coming from a Photoshop background. Now this is very important because this is how you control how much blurriness that we're going to see within a reflection. Now step number 3 is to apply our color ramp into our shader input. Out color of our ramp into the roughness parameter. Then I'll drag the BSDF parameter from our principled shader.
Roughness, Wait, how did he do that?
Of our ramp into the roughness parameter. Then I'll drag the BSDF parameter from our principled shader into the surface input of our...
Oh, correct. So yeah, so added the reflection part back on. It's basically just, it says, yeah, I think he said before, it's just layering. Like,
our material output. Now, if I open it on the 3D view, we can start to see that we start to have some kind of scratches happening within the reflections, but it's not enough. And then step number 4, final tweaks, move the white handle down. Then I'll drag the white value to the left a little bit, and I'll do that until I start to notice that we get some roughness happening within our reflection. This is very similar to when we adjusted the roughness parameter earlier in the shader itself to make it more blurry, but now we have the ability to do this with our scratches texture. Adding more white simply means we're pushing it more towards a value of 1, and a value of 1 means more roughness. Great, and so this is where I'm going to leave off, and you'll notice a little bit of tweaking goes a very long way. It's a very, very common technique that I find myself doing to nearly all of my metallic shaders. And we're going to continue building our shaders out in the next chapter. The goal now is to duplicate our blade shader down to the guard, and we're going to implement a new image projection type called box projections. For step number 1, I'm going to rename our material. I'll make sure I have my blade selected. I'll click where it says material. Material is our default name that Blender gives us for our material. I'll highlight that and then change that to blade. Great, and now we're going to be ready to start duplicating this onto the guard. I'll select my guard, and then we should see the shader editor goes blank. I'll select my material browser, and then I'm going to choose a blade material. So we're assigning the same material. We're going to use it as a preset for this material. Great, and now we're going to see in our viewport that the material is now assigned. Then I'll click the duplicate material button to the right of our material name, 3 buttons over. It's going to be the double stacked paper icon. Once we click that, we can now see that our material name was automatically renamed to blade.001. That's how we know the material has been duplicated. And now all these edits that we're going to apply inside of this material is not going to be affected on the original blade material. Then I'll just rename this to guard, and then we're ready to start modifying our material. Now we notice that we have a problem. The shader doesn't appear to be working on the guard, right? The scratches are now broken. They look stretched on the sides. They look okay on the top and the bottom of the guard, but not on the side. What is going on here? Well, as we learned earlier, our image projection setup works by projecting an image onto an object within our material. As we can see in this demonstration that the sides of the checkerboard are stretched. This is because it's a 2D image projection. So what is going on here? The default projection type within Blender is flat projection type, meaning it only attempts to project from one angle. This is a parameter on our image texture that we imported in Blender. And this works okay for our sword because our sword is a very two-dimensional object. There isn't much depth happening here. And we see the stretching happening on the sphere object, but we cannot see the stretching happening on the blade because again, the blade is very flat. And for the guard, we're going to need a different projection type. If we change our image projection type to box, we can now project not from one angle, but from 3 different angles, which gives us a great solution for objects that have a lot more depth to them. As we can see here, flat breaks down on a 3-dimensional sphere, and the box projection type is holding up just fine, which is what we're going to be working with on our guard. Now, as a quick bonus tip here, the image texture node is a bit confusing because it has a bunch of different parameters, but we only see the values and not the parameter name of which those values belong to, which is terribly, terribly confusing. If we hover over our mouse on any parameter or any tool within Blender, we will get the documentation for this. So both the parameter name and the definition for that parameter, which is incredibly useful, and I use this a lot. Now I'm going to select where it says flat, and then I'm going to change this parameter to box, which is our box image projection type that will change the direction from 1 directional to 3 directional. Great, and as soon as we apply that, we should now see that there's no more stretching on the side of the guard. Now, it's still not quite right, so step number 4, we need to apply our scale. I'll go to my object properties, and we can see that again we have a non-uniform scale, which means our object parameter in our texture coordinate node is also going to be non-uniform, meaning it's going to be stretched. So I'll just repeat the process we did in the last chapter. I'll go up to the object menu, down to apply, and then I'm going to apply scale while I have my guard selected. Once we do that, we can then go back to our object properties, and now we should see that we have a scale value of 111, making our scale value now a uniform scale, a scale that is consistent in X, Y, and Z. And for step number 5,
basically, my opinion on that again is if it's like a 0.5, it's squishing something, and if it's like 1.5 scale, it'll be stretching something by 50%. So having a 1-to-1 scale keeps the image projection to a 1-to-1 scale instead of, stretching it, as I said there, to be half a size or, 50% bigger or twice its size.
we'll adjust the base color parameter. Go inside my principled BSTF. I'll click on my base color parameter, and then I should get my color wheel pop up. The value I'm going to use is a value of 0.08 in the hue, 0.6 in the saturation, and then 0.3 in the value.
Base color. 0.6. Damn it. 0.3. Okay.
value. Again, all these values came from when I prepped the lecture. If you'd like to set these manually using the color wheel, feel free. But the end result is just a brownish, goldish shade. And then for our final step number 6, we'll adjust the scale of our mapping node. As we can see that the size of the scratches on the guard make it feel a bit low res. So we can change the scale values to a value of 2 on our mapping node in X, Y, and Z coordinates. And there we go. We should now see that the scratch texture looks a lot more high resolution. And then we'll continue working on our shaders in the
Yep, basically making the scratches smaller, not bigger, so it looks like there's more of them, I'm assuming.
next chapter. Our goal now is to build out the handle material and finish off the base materials for the sword. For step number 1, we'll assign and duplicate our blade material onto the handle. I'll start by selecting the handle. I'll go to my material browser. Then I'll select the blade material. Then we should see our blade materials now assigned on our handle in the 3D view. Then after that, we need to duplicate and rename this material. So I'll click the double stacked paper icon, third button to the right of the name, click that, and once we see the new material name is blade.001, I'll then rename this to handle. Now we are free to customize this material without interfering with the original blade material. Then step number 2, we need to reset a few of the parameters that we are no longer going to use within the shader. I'm going to delete the image texture and the color ramp node first. I'll select both of those. Then I'll hit X for delete. Then on our principled BSDF, we are now going to set the metallic value back to a value of 0 to make it non-metallic. Then I'm going to bring the specular value down to a value of 0. This will completely turn off the reflections from our shader. Great, and once we have that, we're ready to for step number 3, and that's going to be to bring in our leather cord image texture and assign that. I'll go back to the downloads, the same downloads we've been working with, and then I'll go into my textures directory and then locate the leather cord image texture. I'll drag and drop that into my shader and place it in between our mapping node and our principled BSDF. I'll then connect the out vector of our mapping node into the vector of our image texture, then the out color of our image texture into the base color of parameter of our principled BSDF. And there we go. Now we should start to see that we're starting to get something happen on our material. Now for step number 4, we need to set up the rotation settings of our mapping node to orient the texture in the right direction. But at this point, when we look at these values, which XYZ value on the rotation are we supposed to actually use? And if you're looking at this and you think you have no idea, that is perfectly normal. Before we do anything, we just want to apply the scale and the rotation values. In our object properties, you'll see that the rotation value is currently set to 90 degrees. And this is not inherently bad, but it does make the rotation within our mapping node much more confusing, since we're now going to be trying to rotate on top of an already existing rotate value, which is just terribly confusing. So I'll select my handle, I'll go back up to my object menu, I'll go down to apply, and then I'm going to apply rotation. And just a general note here, in this specific example, we're going to apply rotation, not apply scale like we've been using. And there we go. Now our rotation values should be set all to a value of 0 in X, Y, and Z. Now we're going to do the same for the scale as well. So we'll go up to our object menu, go back to apply, and then apply scale. And then once you do that, we should now see that our scale value is now again a uniform scale 1, 1, 1. So we're not going to have any unwanted stretching happening. Now, which rotation value do we want to adjust? A good tip that I like to do in these cases is jump into my rotation tool inside of my 3D viewport. Here I can test out the rotation and figure out which direction I want to go. In this case, you'll notice if I rotate using the blue handle, I am now mimicking the direction I want my texture to rotate. I'm going to undo out of that, and then if we look up into our XYZ axis at the top right of our viewport, we'll see that the blue axis is the Z axis. So blue handle, blue axis, and there we go. We have our axis that we want to rotate, which is the Z axis. Now if I click and drag on the Z axis of the mapping node, we now start to rotate it around in that same direction we were in our viewport with our object. So it's a much more intuitive way of figuring out which direction we want to go with this. Then I'm going to set the Z axis to a value of 90 degrees exactly. And there we go. Now
just go quite fast, don't mind. Right, I like that.
we can see it's rotated in the right way. And now we can set our scale values. I'm going to move these back to a value of 1 in X, Y, and Z. And that's it. That's a wrap for our handle material. And as a bonus tip, we will be using the flat image projection again. So in the guard, we changed this to box. In this specific case, we're going to leave it flat. And the reason for this is, although you'll notice on the sphere, it looks stretched because the sphere has enough depth for us to see this, but the handle is a much more oval shape, so it's much flatter. Combine that along with the fact that the texture has a horizontal pattern, this This makes the perfect solution for creating a seamless pattern that's going to go all the way around the handle. And then our final step number 5, we're just going to finish the base materials off by assigning the guard material to the remaining objects of the handle. I'll start by selecting our torus object, go to the material browser, and then select guard material. And we don't need to rename, we do not need to duplicate, we can just simply assign this, and then we're done with these. I'll repeat this for the remaining objects. We have a total of 6 assignments that we have to do. So I'll select another torus, material browser, select guard, and then I'm just going to repeat this process for the remaining objects. And then that's it. That's going to be a wrap for our base materials. And next up, we're going to get into the runes, and we're going to continue that in the next chapter.
That's crazy.
The goal now is to apply the runes to the blade, and we're going to do so with the help of our emission parameter. Step number 1, we need to duplicate our texture coordinate in our mapping node. First, I need to select my blade and jump into the shader editor. I'll select both of them, our texture coordinate and our mapping node, and then I'm going to go up to my node menu, and then I'm going to select duplicate. And once we hit duplicate, then we'll see that we have 2 nodes attached to my cursor. I'm going to move these down below and then click to drop them back into my shader editor.
Alright, so what are we doing again?
The goal now is to apply the runes to the blade, and we're going to do so with the help of our emission parameter. Step number 1, we need to duplicate our texture coordinate in our mapping node. First, I need to select my blade and jump into the shader editor. I'll select both of them, our texture coordinate and our mapping node, and then I'm going to go up to my node menu, and then I'm going to select duplicate. And once we hit duplicate, then we'll see that we have 2 nodes attached to my cursor. I'm going to move these down below and then click to drop them back into my shader editor. Now, step number 2 is to import the runes texture. I'll go back to my downloads, go into the textures directory, and then we're going to locate the runes.jpg. And then I'm just going to click and drag them into my shader editor. Now, for step number 3, we need to make our connection. So I'm going to plug the mapping node's out vector into the in vector of the image texture node. And then I'm going to take my runes out color, and then I'm going to plug them into the emission slot of the principled BSDF shader. Now, by default, we may or may not be seeing anything, and that's because we need to set the emission value to a value of 1. If it's set to a value of 0, that means it's turned off. So be sure to turn that on to value 1. Now for step number 4, we still do not quite see what we're expecting to see. So I'm going to go through some steps on how I figure out on how to set my mapping values. So keep your eyes on the video for a bit, and then after I'll give you my values to make it a little bit easier on you. First, the object parameter in our texture coordinate node, the 0 location, the 0 rotation, and the scale values start at the origin of the object. So what is the origin of the object? In the layout tab, we'll see that we have a little orange dot on the object. This is the origin, is what Blender thinks is the center of the object. This is what the texture coordinate node's object parameter starts at. So this is a value of 0, 0, 0 on the texture coordinate location node. First, I'm going to set the scale value. So if I shift click and drag on the scale and move this in X and Y until I get something in the ballpark. Shift click and drag is how we move a parameter with precision control. Next, I'll need to disable the repeating texture. I'm going to set this to clip so that we're only going to see one of them. Next, I'll need to find the center. I could easily move these values manually to figure out where it is. But since this texture starts at the center where the origin is, I want my runes to be in the center. So I can just offset this half of whatever my scale value is. So these are all the values I ended up with. My scale value is going to be a 0.1 in scale X.
GPS is 7. Let's see, it was already on there. The location, okay. So 1.05. That's, isn't that 5? Okay, not 5. Oh, that's -5. It's not. Okay, that's why it wasn't working. Probably gonna have to do this like 500 times. It's kind of crazy.
X value of 7 in scale Y, and then Z doesn't technically do anything here, so I'll just leave it at a value of 1. And then I'll do the location of being of negative 0.05, which is half of my scale X. And there we go. Now it's all going to be centered. And working with the mapping node can take some time to get used to. It can be a bit confusing at first, but after you get some practice, you'll notice that eventually you'll start to feel like you have some control with this. And that is our runes, and we'll continue in the next chapter. The goal now is to add the color and the bloom effect to our runes. For step number 1, I'm going to boost the emission strength. I'm going to set the value to a value of 100, which will make it very bright and easy to see. But this doesn't quite feel right. Something's missing, right? And that leads us to step number 2, which is to set up our render properties. I'll go up to my render properties panel and we're going to turn on ambient inclusion and bloom. I'll start with the ambient occlusion settings. I'll set the distances 2 and then the factor of 2 as well. This is going to help exaggerate the contact shadows, and that's going to be most visible where our blade connects with the guard, just giving us a much more believable shadow area. Then I'm going to turn on bloom. I'm going to turn my threshold to 5, and that's basically going to tell Blender to only do the really hot areas, which is just isolating our runes to be the only thing that's going to glow. Then I'm going to change the radius to 5 as well. That's going to lower it so we don't get such a widespread glow. And then I'm going to change the intensity value to a value of 0.2, and that's just going to overall make the bloom a lot brighter. And then for step number 3, we're going to set up the color using the Mix RGB node. Back in our shader editor, I'll go up to the add menu and I'm going to use the search once again. And then I'm going to search for Mix RGB. And for a general note,
take a screenshot. So, Mix RGB.
note here, Mix RGB is one word, not two. I'm going to turn my threshold to 5, and that's basically going to tell Blender to only do the really hot areas, which is just isolating our runes to be the only thing that's going to glow. Then I'm going to change the radius to 5 as well. That's going to lower it so we don't get such a widespread glow. And then I'm going to change the intensity value to a value of 0.2, and that's just going to overall make the bloom a lot brighter. And then for step number 3, we're going to set up the color using the Mix RGB node. Back in our shader editor, I'll go up to the add menu and I'm going to use the search once again. And then I'm going to search for Mix RGB. And for a general note here, Mix RGB is one word, not two. Once I find that, I'll hit enter to confirm. Then that's going to create the node. It's going to attach it to my cursor. And then I'm going to hover over the connection between our image texture and our emission parameter until I see that highlight. And then once I do, I'm going to click to drop it.
This is not good. Right. I see a factor. I see that. I see the AB. I don't see. I see clamp factor. You know what? I'm just gonna go with that. Just go with mix. Let's say mix RGB. See what happens. See what happens. Get in there.
To automatically connect those up. And now we should see our out color of our runes going into the color 1 of our Mix RGB node, and then the out color of our Mix RGB going into our emission parameter of our principled BSDF shader. Okay, so what's happening here? We lost our runes, things are getting really bright. How do we control this a bit better? What the Mix RGB node is currently doing is it's mixing between color 1 and color 2. If I click and drag on the factor parameter, you'll see that we get more or less of the color 2 parameter being mixed in overall. The color 1 is the main parameter, and then color 2 is what gets put on top of color 1, and we control how much of that with our factor value. The first value we're going to set is set the factor to 1. So we're going to colorize the color 2 parameter. I'm going to click on that, and then we'll see a color wheel pop up. And then if I just click and drag around on this, you'll see that we start to colorize our glow that we're getting. Very simple. I'm going to set my values manually, and I'm going to use 0.03 in the hue, 1 in the saturation, and then 1 in the value. That's just going to make it a very vibrant orange color. And now we want to bring the runes texture back into this. Currently we're over...
What do you mean orange? What? Why is mine not orange?
that we're getting. Very simple. I'm going to set my values manually, and I'm going to use 0.03 in the hue, 1 in the saturation, and then 1 in the value. That's just going
to... Again, so okay, 0.3, not 3.
going to make it a very vibrant orange color. And now we want to bring the runes texture back into this. Currently we're overriding all of that. So I'll go up to my mix parameter and then we'll see we get a big list of stuff. These are our blending modes. And if you're coming from a Photoshop background or another image editor, these might be very familiar for you. If not, that's okay. The only two parameters that I really find myself using a lot is multiply and add. And in this case, I'm going to use the multiply parameter. So I'll change that to multiply. Now it's working. We're getting our runes. But what exactly is happening here? And basically, what multiply is doing for us is it's taking the black values from our rune image and using that to remove the orange values going into the emission. And we'll get more into the mix RGB node a lot in the later courses. I use this node a lot. And that's going to be a wrap for our blade. And we'll do the final shader in the next chapter. The goal now for the final chapter of our shaders is to set up the pommel shader. For step number one, we're just going to duplicate the pommel shader. I'll select my pommel. I'll immediately duplicate it with the double stack paper icon, and then I'm going to rename it to pommel. So the base shader is all set up for us. And then for step number two, we just need to copy the rune nodes over. I'm going to select my blade again, and then I'm going to select the texture coordinate node, and then shift select the mapping node and the multiply mix RGB node. And then once we have those three nodes selected, I'll go up to my The goal now for the final chapter of our shaders is to set up the pommel shader. For step number one, we're just going to duplicate the pommel shader. I'll select my pommel. I'll immediately duplicate it with the double stack paper icon, and then I'm going to rename it to pommel. So the base shader is all set up for us. And then for step number two, we just need to copy the rune nodes over. I'm going to select my blade again, and then I'm going to select the texture coordinate node, and then shift select the mapping node and the multiply mix RGB node. And then once we have those three nodes selected, I'll go up to my node menu and then select copy, and this will allow us to paste it over into the pommel shader. I'll select my pommel, go to node menu, then click paste. Then after that, the goal now for the final chapter will allow us to paste it over into the Copy. The pommel shader. I'll select my pommel, go to node menu, then click paste. Then after that, we should see that we have our three nodes set up. Then step number three, we need to import the rune solo image texture. Located in the downloads, inside the textures directory, I'll grab my rune solo. I'm going to drag and drop it into my shader network. Next, I'm going to make those connections, mapping node into the vector of the image texture, and then image texture color into the color one slot of our mix RGB multiply. And I'll plug that mix RGB multiply into the emission. Now, we don't see anything just yet. So what's going on here? Well, step number four, we need to set up our parameters, and I'm going to put my emission strength all the way up to a value of 100, the same value that we used with our blade material. And then we should start to see something, but our mapping and our tiling and our repeats are not set up correctly. So first I'll show you how I get these values, and then after
I'm dead.
apply mix RGB node. And then once we have those three nodes selected, I'll go up to my node menu and then select copy, and this will allow us to paste it over into the pommel shader. I'll select my pommel, go to node menu, then click paste. Then after that, we should see that we have our three nodes set up. Then step number three, we need to import the rune solo image texture. Located in the downloads, inside the textures directory, I'll grab my rune solo. I'm going to drag and drop it into my shader network. Next, I'm going to make those connections, mapping node into the vector of the image texture, and then image texture color into the color one slot of our mix RGB multiply. And I'll plug that mix RGB multiply into the emission. Now, we don't see anything just yet. So what's going on here? Well, step number four, we need to set up our parameters, and I'm going to put my emission strength all the way up to a value of 100, the same value that we used with our blade material. And then we should start to see something, but our mapping and our tiling and our repeats are not set up correctly. So first I'll show you how I get these values, and then after I'm done, I'll share with you the exact values again. First, I'm going to reset all my parameters to the default values on the mapping node, 0 for location and rotation, and then 1 for scale. I'm going to disable the repeating texture, set it by setting it to clip, so we only see 1. And so now I'm going to adjust my location X and Y until I can get those lined up, and I'm using shift, click, and drag to be able to precision control this. And note here that I'm not trying to do the Z because this is a flat image projection, not a box. It's going to go right through the pommel. And we're going to set this to negative 0.5 in location X and Y. Then scale for...
Why is it fine? Okay. 0.5. 0.5. Isn't that because of scale? I missed something?
Value that we used with our blade material. And then we should start to see something. But our mapping and our tiling and our repeats are not set up correctly. So first I'll show you how I get these values, and then after I'm done I'll share with you the exact values again. First I'm going to reset all my parameters to the default values on the mapping node. 0 for location and rotation, and then 1 for scale. I'm going to disable the repeating texture, set it by setting it to clip so we only see 1. And so now I'm going to adjust my location X and Y until I can get those lined up, and I'm using shift, click, and drag to be able to precision control this. And note here that I'm not trying to do the Z because this is a flat image projection, not a box. It's going to go right through the pommel. And we're going to set this to -0.5 in location X and Y, then scale for 1 in all directions. Now your values may end up being slightly different. This is a very organic process. Small discrepancies should be expected. And now that's going to be a wrap for the pommel shader and the rest of our shaders for our sword. And now it's time to check out what we're going to do in part 3 of this series. But before that, I encourage you to click the link in the description to learn more about our premium membership. This is where you will unlock the Blender track, which is the ultimate beginner to advanced transformation. This is where you'll find the rest of the fast track army leveling up and climbing the mountain of mastering Blender. Seeing everyone's progress every day is a huge motivator, and I hope to see your progress in the Discord. Then in part 3, we'll learn about geometry.
Probably am going to, depends how much it is, but that's very nice. Finish this. It's only kind of 2 o'clock here, so I'll get another video in today. But I'm enjoying this course. Very nice course. A lot of advanced stuff and made really simple. Anyway, that's the end of this video. Maybe see you later. Bye.